Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the show. Darren, hey, man.
Hey, I'm still here, I guess. Still kicking. We got this. We're back again with another bad rhyme. So,
Well, welcome. I hope you had a good week. I hope all of you out there have had a good week. We're here back to talk about, well, someone actually brought this up to me, Darren.
yeah.
And I thought it was a really interesting point and a good idea. They said, you've done what, like 3 or 4 of these? And you really haven't introduced yourselves. You haven't talked about yourselves that much. Obviously, we're discussing our loves of certain films, but they want to hear about us a little bit.
Why would they want to know about us? Yeah.
I don't know. I think, when he brought up the Social Security number, I thought that was odd.
Oh, I did?
But
oh, they did. You mean they wanted our...
No, they did.
Okay.
They did. We're off to a swinging start, people. So basically, we're going to talk about, why do we love movies? Why movies? Why are we so into them? There's a lot of people now that are into film, but why are we? How did we get into this? What were the films that turned us into addicts, jonesing for the next major release? And so I guess let's start with you, Darren, right off the bat. What got you to fall in love with movies? Where does it start?
So I think the biggest part with film for me is probably the experience of going to see movies either with people at home or in theaters. Obviously my experiences, most probably in the past 20, 30 years, being roughly my age, would be starting with home and then moving into theaters, etc. I think that the biggest part has been the experience with the community and the group, being able to have that conversation, engage, have fun, and that general experience, seeing it with people. I think a lot of that's been lost lately with the expectations that people are watching things on smaller and smaller screens, and the love comes from having that initial experience where it was truly visceral in a movie theater, I think, with friends and family. That's maybe the best part. Of shared experience, frankly, might be the most important part.
Was there a film that got you hooked, though? Was there any film that you went, I love this, I want more of this?
I don't know if there's a specific film. I think that in general, at least in the past, there's been movies that have brought people together in one communal location. And I think that in general, that go-to experience, there's probably a long list of films I can say that inspired that, but it's hard to pin down a specific moment in time where that became a thing. I will mention the impact of certain elements of film. So let's talk about briefly, I'll backtrack into the experience, right? I care about the communal experience. I think the biggest impactor was when I actually worked for an AMC movie theater when I was 16. That amplified it a lot, to be honest with you. And then on top of that, that was about the same time, right around 2000, 1999, 98, where the highlighted films, right, the ones in which were big movies, and even the ones that were small, some of them weren't that big of a ordeal, started getting midnight releases. And going to see movies at midnight with people that were releasing with a full theater was really a hallmark. And I think that really came about right around 2000, personally. So I think that's the highlight to me, why I really got into it.
Well, mine's a little different than yours.
I would assume.
Yeah, first off, I'd always gone to the movies. My mom loved movies. She did say that it was a little bit of a contentious thing with her mother and father. And so, it was her form of rebellion, was going to the movies. But basically, when I was growing up, I got to see a lot of films when Disney did their animated re-releases. This, by the way, for those that I was born in 1970. And essentially, I grew up when they would do re-releases. There wasn't home video yet, so they showed everything again for Disney, all of them. And she took me to every single one. But I would say for me, that bell rang. And I guess I should also mention the audience. We'll get into this. Darren and I both like to make movies. We want to be filmmakers. For me, it actually begins right in 1979. I was 9 years old. And my mom... And keep in mind, by this point, I had started seeing some adult movies. I don't mean porn. I mean, movies with action, violence, adventure, romance. I'd seen some R-rated movies by this point. Not many, but I was developing into really having I like these kind of movies. These are cooler than the kiddie films. And my mom needed to drop me off. She needed to get rid of this pain in the butt for a little while. And so she's like, here, we're going to drop you at this theater. It's playing The Muppet Movie. And I begged her not to make me watch this kids movie. Mom, I'm too old. I'm 9 years old. And she says, you got to, because you can't go with me. I'm doing business. It's a whole long story. Maybe another day. We had moved to California. It was a nightmare. Everything went bad. Our stuff was stolen. And we had come back to Michigan in hopes to get my dad to get a new job. My mom was looking for a home. You know what I mean? It was a rebuild. So she needed to get rid of me. So basically dropped me off at the Muppet movie. And I cannot tell you what a profound effect this crazy movie had on me. I fell madly in love with it. I wanted to see it again and again and again. And I saw it so many times that I started to turn around and watch people in the theater. I started to watch their reactions to jokes, to emotional moments. I'm not kidding you. This movie became this weird litmus test for my brain. And I started to realize, you talked about that communal experience. I never thought of it before. I'd gone to the movie theater before, but something about this movie and the fact it's about making movies. And Kermit even has a line when he's asked in the beginning of the movie, Dom DeLuise says, wouldn't you like to go to Hollywood and make millions of people happy? And that line becomes a mantra for Kermit throughout the whole movie, where he says millions of people happy. That idea resonated with me, and I'm looking at all these people around me, and it's like it clicked. You know what I mean? Like, I got it. Like, I'm experiencing what they're talking about. And ever since then, like, Star Wars came out in 1977, and if you talk to people my age, they always say Star Wars. They always, Star Wars made me a movie. Star Wars. I loved Star Wars. I adored Star Wars, but it didn't affect me the way the Muppet movie did.
I think that's a definitive movie in most people's life. Even though now, date-wise, I was born in 1984, so our experiences are slightly different timing-wise, but
yes,
the reality is the impact of that film was pretty important. Obviously, I'm a huge Muppet fan. Gonzo is my absolute favorite.
Mine too.
I grew up in the age of Muppet Babies and stuff like that, and all the other Muppet films that followed on were mostly watched a lot by me. I enjoyed a lot of them. They were very good. I think the biggest part that they had is that they had a cross-generational appeal, and this is generally true, I think, with a lot of the films that we could say that had had a big impact on us, especially in the earlier years. They transcend an audience. I'm sure that you found, maybe you remember, maybe you don't, I don't know, but I'm curious, did you see older generations in that audience beyond your age at that time? Were you?
Oh yes, there were adults, there were kids, men, women, black, white. It was the spectrum, because I saw the movie at multiple theaters.
Well, if you see that, so like the example of the generational thing, right? You're talking about family going to see a movie, they weren't into it, things like that. Maybe, I mean, in general, my perspective would be is that movies really became a thing, a highlight in for the generation that was of age in a certain age bracket. So like this, let's say 67, 68 year, right, up until about like mid 90s are probably the ultimate time window for film and cinema, and things started to shift, I want to say, after 95. So if you were growing up or were coming of age or were of age in a sweet spot, let's say that 8 to 20 age, in that range, you might be the target highlight to have the most impact, because anything before that, frankly, I feel like would be too old for most of that generation, right? Not to say that they're bad, but like they're just a different style and quality of filmmaking happen after 68, 70-ish that really changed everything. I mean, most of the movies that people remember today and view and celebrate, or some of them are having their 40th, 50th, 30th, whatever anniversaries, and they're some of the most notoriety, biggest pop culture films there are. And you grew up through that for sure. I grew up through part of it as well. I was younger, but still. And those experiences have not been replicated in current days, which I think is why we might be more attuned and be more thrilled about film than the average person today.
I don't disagree with that. Here's the thing. There were so many movies, and the time period you're mentioning is pretty much dead on, because it was the beginning of the birth of the multiplex. While there were multiplexes going back, they were blowing up in the 1970s. And the first blockbuster that most books record was The Exorcist. Then you had Jaws, and these experiences just kept growing, so they knew there was a demand that was larger than the theaters could handle. So the multiplex comes about in the 70s, just an explosion. There was a multiplex in almost every mall at a certain point. So people were going to the movies a lot more, and you had a variety of films to choose from. You had westerns, you had comedies, you had horror, you had science fiction. I mean, and in the 80s you had that explosion of like blended genres. Westerns was science fiction, and horror is Alien a horror movie? Is it a sci-fi movie? Why not both? It was a great time period, and there's so much imagination. And before it was the drive-in. That's where Roger Corman exploded. And so, yeah, that period from that late 60s into the 70s and then into that golden age of the 1980s for film was amazing. And I think you said 95, and that's interesting because 95 is about when we were in that Sundance period. That independent film was exploding, but it was just starting to die out. That flame was going down.
Well, for me, in that perspective, like that era, you're saying at cutoff point in 95, right? I guess you could pull some specific films that were events to go to after that I vividly recall.
Well, that's not what I'm saying. There were big movies still, but I'm agreeing with you because that Sundance time period, that's when you've got like Kevin Smith coming up, Quentin Tarantino.
Right.
It was sort of the 90s. If the 90s had a golden age, it was the Sundance period, right? That's what they'd call it. It was just, they all showed at the Sundance Film Festival. After that, you see a cooling. There wasn't like a continuation of that. So I agree with you. Like post 95, it began to cool down and you saw the rise of video games.
Yeah, people that could do things more at home in general, like we've seen recently, right? As technologies evolve, people are absorbing more material at home on their phones in ways that aren't communal. And I think that maybe those experiences are becoming less good, maybe not even as visceral. I think that's a weird term, but in general, there's a commitment, right? If you're going to go to a theater to watch a movie, there's a dedicated commitment to that. There's a focal point, and there's a delayed gratification to that experience that is fundamentally missing. And as a result, I think that in today's world, maybe that's what benefited us. The build up, the anticipation of going to a theater, hopefully getting a pop and a popcorn, sitting down, waiting in line, the anticipation of seeing the movie, that is the highlight. That's part of the experience. And I think that the movies themselves, if you go back and look at them, frankly, a lot of them are quite good. But I think they're remembered even better because the expectation or the preparedness to go and see it is so part of seeing the movie itself with the people, talking about it for weeks, thinking about it, seeing advertisements. And back then in the earlier 90s and 80s, even in late 90s, I guess, where the internet just started becoming a thing, there wasn't much information about a movie. Back when Blair Witch could be Blair Witch, right?
Right.
That doesn't happen anymore. There is no suspense or surprise. Everything's spoiled. There's too many trailers. There's too much information.
Yeah, I mean, maybe to put a bow on this part of it, but I was just talking to someone the other day about exactly what you're talking about. And we used to say that the experience of going to see a movie was just that. You'd see a trailer, get excited. If it was a movie you wanted to see, you looked for every gold nugget that was in the media. I remember when Ghostbusters was announced, and we didn't know what this was going to be. This was this was very new for that time period. And Night Flight, which was a show on USA, advertised they were going to have a Ghostbusters special. This show didn't start till 11 or 12 midnight, and so had to stay up. My friends and I, we all had our VCRs ready, and I ended up staying up the entire night and watching the entire special before the movie came out. And then you go to a movie theater, and before the film we'd go early and we'd walk up and down the halls to see all the posters of the upcoming movies, and you would get the popcorn and the soda, because it was just part of the experience. You got yourself a little something, maybe a snack, maybe some goobers, who knows. And you sat down and you looked forward. Imagine this, Darren.
Yeah.
I bet you people today can't grasp it. Actually looking forward to the sneak previews. Hey, what's coming? Because that could be our first view of those films. And I think weirdly we can even pinpoint when that died, which was after The Phantom Menace, because I remember I wish I could remember the movie, but a certain movie, people were buying tickets to see this movie that no one cared about just because it was announced that The Phantom Menace first trailer would drop in this movie. And I cannot think of another film afterwards that happened. I'm sure it did. I'm sure there was some Marvel movie at some point, but that's much later.
Batman did that. IMAX did that, right? Some crazy stuff where they put the first 10 minutes of the movie. Jurassic World is the most recent one. I can think of it.
That was different.
Yeah,
but
yeah.
You're right. They would do that first 15 minutes. I'm talking about sneak previews specifically where you got excited. It's your first look because the Phantom Menace is right on the cusp of when the internet exploded. Like, it just exploded.
I feel like the cutoff point was somewhere around 2007-8 when things started becoming basically all available online. If I remember correctly, Apple started to have all movie trailers, almost all movie trailers available through their website or through QuickTime or something like that, before YouTube was really a thing. Yeah. So
there was a website, because they had iMovie, which was there. If you made short films, you could post it up onto iMovie, and that's pre-2007, because 2007, I believe, is the beginning of YouTube. And as we know, YouTube changed everything. It didn't kick off that fast, but it was pretty fast once it did, and it was the end of short film websites, and actually it was the end of a lot of websites because everybody went to YouTube and trailers went there. But you're right, there was like iMovie and Apple.com, and I think like if you went to Paramount.com, you saw those trailers. It was beginning to change, and it was a different thing.
So I'm curious, of the movies, because this might be to speak to some of our influences, even though they're not maybe some of them are questionable at this point. What movies do you remember vividly seeing, and which movies have you seen, or which movie, or top several, maybe there's different ones, have you seen in the theaters? So like, which ones did you go back and see multiple times? Do you remember very clearly doing that, actively focusing on that? And which ones were the ones you watched the most multiple times, and which ones, to me, that's a whole other highlight, because the effort to go back and see a movie again in theaters. And for you being a little bit older than me, you had the experience where you had to see it. You only could see it realistically in theaters for a lot of things. I was at the beginning of VHS tape being kind of a thing, so there's a chance it would come out at some point and be available, but it was still back then. VHS tapes were stupidly expensive, so to get it, you'd have to rent it, and that's a whole other conversation. But
right. I get what you're asking.
What do you think? Yeah, or your tops?
Well, it depends,
or do you remember?
because again, no, I do remember.
Okay.
I can't say every single film, but I can remember mostly what I saw multiple times. It depends on what we're talking about. Star Wars at the age of 7, yeah, I saw that a few times in the theater, but it depends on where I lived too, because when Jaws hit, my dad took us, myself and a friend, to the drive-in, but we didn't see it. I'm actually almost positive we saw it the year after it came out. I was looking at some dates and I was like, it was probably a year or so later, because Jaws was 75, right? I'm trying to remember.
Yeah, 75.
So I don't believe I saw it at the age of 5. So the earliest I probably saw it was 6 or 7 even. It could have been 2 years later. I don't remember. As I said, there was a turbulent period in our lives. We moved a lot.
But you had to see it in a theater, right?
I saw it in the drive-in.
Well, still a theater. That counts, yeah.
Okay, fine. But my point here is that we couldn't just go see that one multiple times. So I only saw Jaws once in the theater, and then I saw it on a re-release much, much later. It was great. So, but you get to 1984, for instance, and I saw an R-rated movie, The Terminator, I don't know how many times. I went back, and I had permission to see R-rated movies at that theater, so I saw Terminator I don't know how many times. So again, it depends on what movie it was, when. Obviously I said the Muppet movie, Star Wars, Empire Strikes Back, Return of the Jedi, all multiple viewings, Ghostbusters, Gremlins, any of the big major movies that this generation's heard about us talk about ad nauseum. Yeah, I saw them multiple times. Back to the Future, those were all films I saw multiple times. It just depended on where did it show. I would have gone to see Big Trouble in Little China, 20 times before it left, except it only played 1 week at a drive-in theater where I live now, actually. I'm back to where I used to live. And there was a drive-in theater just outside of town. My dad and I went. We saw Highlander and Big Trouble in Little China.
Well, that's a great double feature.
Oh, it was amazing. It was absolutely amazing. We saw Big Trouble first, then Highlander. My dad loved Big Trouble in Little China. Remember, not a movie guy, but the main character was a truck driver, and my dad used to be a trucker, so he identified with the character. And then Highlander, he hated it. He just did not like Highlander. But I didn't get to see either of those because they only lasted a week at that drive-in. One more I'll name that I wanted to see more than once, and I saw with my dad again at the drive-in, was Fright Night. Oh. And I got to tell you, that is one of the few movies I really bonded with my dad over, because he didn't like genre films. He just didn't like them. Of all the he loved Hunt for Red October much later. That was his jam. Top Gun, he loved it. Those are older guy movies for that time period. But Fright Night he liked. He was actually surprised by how much he liked Fright Night. And I loved Fright Night. So it's always going to be a special movie to me for that reason, but I didn't get to see it more than once.
So it's funny you mentioned Terminator. That was my first movie in theaters going to see, was Terminator in 1984. So I have that hallmark of being like a couple months old and going to see Terminator. Apparently I was good. My parents could watch it. So I was in theaters for that. That was I'm not memorable because I don't remember it, but to them they obviously do. So I think that's an interesting movie to take me to.
That is. Everybody, like, I noticed with people born later than me, they always say, I remember the first R-rated movie I ever saw. And it's like, I don't. I saw multiple R-rated movies at a very young age. So, unfortunately, I don't have that. And my friend Catherine, she's like, Die Hard. She'll always remember Die Hard because it was the first R-rated movie she ever saw. And I don't. I wish I could say that.
I can say viscerally, like a PG-13 movie that was stood out was definitely like Days of Thunder. Was one of the first PG-13 films I saw. I can't remember, that was 89 or 88. I can't remember what exact year that movie came out, but it was something like a few years after Top Gun, right? Back in that weird Tom Cruise heyday thing. I remember that very well. My dad wanted to see it really bad. That was a shockingly fun film going to see because even though it's more mature in a lot of ways, the basic conflict in that film worked well for someone who was younger. You understood everything. Nothing really went over your head as far as like the actual conflict. It's almost like a Disney movie for adults, kind of. It's very simple. It made sense. It wasn't hard to follow. And then later films, I think, so to go into films seeing multiple times, I didn't personally probably see things multiple times. Maybe I saw Ghostbusters 2 twice in theaters. I probably saw both Back to the Future 2 and 3 twice in theaters. But then we get into the later movies that started to really have an impact. I did not see Terminator 2 in theaters. That's kind of, I feel blasphemous about it, but definitely that was R-rated for my age at that point. Definitive. However, I went to see Jurassic Park. I believe I saw Jurassic Park 4 times in theaters, I believe. And that was a record-setting number. But you have to remember back then, again, something for the audience, movies didn't just stay in first-run theaters. So if you went to see Jurassic Park, you're probably going to get to see it maybe once or twice in first run when it's like, well, back then it was like $5 probably or something like that. But if you go to second run, it was like $1, maybe even cheaper.
Dollar Cinema.
Yeah, like $1.
Yeah.
So and popcorn was like $1 or $2 at the Dollar Cinema. So going to see movies back then and waiting for second run would be like 6 weeks later back then probably, or 2 months, maybe not for Jurassic Park, but
it depended because it depended on the movie, whether it was a hit or if it flopped. I remember the movie Millennium went to the Dollar Cinema in Florida because that was my first experience with the Dollar Cinema, was when I lived in Florida, and the turnaround was very fast for that one because nobody went to see that movie. I rather like it. I like science fiction, but
it's a great movie for sure.
Yeah, it's a neat little film. That was my first experience with the Dollar Cinema, so I don't really know for every area.
I think people forget too, back in that time period in the early 90s, maybe even mid 90s, movies had literally 4 or 5 months in the theaters. Like, movies stuck around for a long time. They did not just show up for like 6 weeks and disappear. They were there for months. Literally, they're there for a long time, which is not true at all today, right? They're on streaming 6 weeks later. Total different world. So if you saw a movie, let's say you liked the movie, you saw it right on release day or near release day, you might want to see it again in 2 months, and it's still in theaters. That's not true really anymore. So
no, it's not true at all. I mean, I could tell you, I worked at a theater and we had Crocodile Dundee for 3 months. The only movie, or not Crocodile Dundee, I apologize, Crocodile Dundee 2.
Oh.
And as we cleaned, I actually literally have to this day a loathing, and I loved the music back then, but that theme, we were all driven insane by that dun 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 dun. Dun, 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 dun. We were losing our minds, and we were begging the management, please get another movie. People in town, please get another movie. But that's what it was like back then. If they could hold on to it, and I'll show the flip side of this. In that same theater, in that same small town, where I'm back, basically, I got to see Godzilla versus Mechagodzilla. When we moved to this town, it was the first movie I saw in that cinema. Because back then, if a print floated around, it didn't matter. The distributor could just send it to any theater they wanted, and you could see movies that trust me, you were not seeing at any of the major theaters.
We literally had a theater. We had two theaters. I think both of them were about 6 screens, maybe 8 screens, something like that. They were like literally separated by. I mean, I think they were both like. I think one was 6 and one was 4, something weird like that. Or maybe one. They were both 6, but they were so close to each other. One was an older theater, and one was a brand new one that just basically got built. But because they were literally a half a mile apart from each other, one was across from the shopping mall, and one was in the shopping mall loop with the shopping mall, but wasn't attached to it. They didn't have the same movies. They would share and split who had what for what release, and it was the weirdest thing. So you had to check for like the first 5-6 years I lived in this town, which theater you had to go to see the movie you wanted to see, because they didn't have both the same movies. And it was weird. And you always preferred the new one, over the old one. So when the old one got something you wanted to see, like Star Trek First Contact, that was so annoying. Going to the crappy old theater, and like the new theater got something else that you didn't care to see. That was a nuisance. But I don't know if you had that kind of bizarre experience.
No, not really. No, because my youth is mostly, not completely, and we traveled downstate a lot. But it's in this small town, so we had the one main theater, and for a brief time we had 2 drive-ins for a brief time, but the secondary drive-in didn't last very long. But when I lived in Florida, I was surrounded by Blockbuster videos and movie theaters, and my friends and I would travel almost an hour to go to little art house cinemas. Now I was hunting down the weirder, obscure movies, because maybe that's something to talk about too real quick before we get into the whole what got us into filmmaking and that. As you get older, your tastes change. So when I was younger, I was definitely more of a mainstream guy because I was a kid, and I grew up with these great mainstream movies, just these classics of cinema. And you had HBO, you had VHS on the rise. We were not want for film, okay? We just weren't. It was everywhere, even in this small town. When video hit this small town, we had so many video stores. I think we had like 9 or 10 of them at one point. But I saw so many movies in that time period that it started to change my taste. And I'd seen a B movie on VHS that I fell so madly in love with that it changed my view on what a mainstream movie was, or maybe better, what a B movie was. And it was a film called Trancers, and I fell in love with that movie so much. I was like I kind of avoided those type of movies up to a certain age, and then I'd seen this movie and I went, this movie's great. And I realized you're not going to see something this weird in a mainstream movie. And then I started seeking out more films like that on VHS, and this time the idea of so bad it's good also wasn't a thing, but people did recommend bad movies to me. I saw this terrible movie on VHS, you got to see this thing, or this movie was so weird you wouldn't believe it. And so friends would talk about these films and pass them back and forth.
No, I think that's so you're seeking out so for me, my experiences were more seeking out the more premium experience half the time. The things were more unique, because a lot of my stuff that I dealt with specifically was trying to find, so back when like new audio formats and 3D stuff was coming back again, was a huge highlight in some of the things that I enjoyed a lot. I loved the idea of 3D and new sound formats and things that were coming about, IMAX and stuff that were really being pushed. And like, you had to seek out a lot of the good 3D, a lot of the good IMAX experiences and things like that. You couldn't just go down the street and find an IMAX. You couldn't go down the street and get Atmos sound for long. You couldn't have the best 3D. Ironically, of all things, I've traveled a lot for IMAX movies, just because at the same vantage point, I did travel a lot for a lot of unique experiences for 3D films. Back when 3D was at its, I want to call it its peak, there was the most formats, at least the new generation of 3D. So like what happened between like 2007 to like 2014, probably 2015. I went and saw a movie that I saw the most in theaters because I was curious if it would be different, and that was The Avengers, like 2011's Avengers, Marvel, Josh Whedon's Avengers, and I got to watch it in every single 3D format. So I watched that movie in theaters 5 times, maybe 6 times actually. I saw it in RealD. I saw it in Dolby 3D. I saw it in IMAX 3D. I saw it in some other 3D format, and then I saw it without 3D I believe, as well, just to see what the difference. Oh, I saw it in no, I saw it in 4D, the D box with 3D. I saw it in that format too, because I wanted to have all the experiences, because there was so much weird stuff in that early 2000s. And I think a lot of that was something that used to be a thing a long time ago, not a long time ago, but like in probably the 70s, when they had opportunities to try new things. Earthquake did this with their Sense Surround, and other things would bring people into theaters to make things exciting again. And I feel like there were opportunities with that movie, at least, because I enjoyed it a lot personally. I liked it. I thought it was one of my favorite films of all time. And I wanted to have all the different possible experiences, because I knew it was never going to happen again. It was like, this is it. I got to go try it in all these different flavors, just so I have the experience with it. And I feel like that's something that Hollywood has missed, the opportunity to like bring unique experiences back to the theaters where it's actually worth going and seeking out, let alone just a movie you can't see everywhere. Because I feel like movies are generally everywhere now. If they're in theaters,
Yes.
they're not in special places. You don't have to travel to them. So the experience is really the only thing they got left. But I found very quickly, the experience is only as good as the audience you're with. So if you have your audience that you're with and they aren't engaged, aren't into it, the 4D chairs, the 3D, a lot of that doesn't mean a whole lot. The sound doesn't either. You got to really have people there that care about what's going on to some degree. And I hate to say it, but I don't feel like I've had that experience probably since, again, we talk about it in a different thing, but since the Avengers Endgame movie. But I haven't had an audience be into the movie anymore. To me, that is an experience that we're losing very quickly with film in general.
Well, I don't have the same. Again, we grew up at different time periods, so that I think is part of it. You know, the idea of an IMAX experience and different kind of sound was not a big thing when I was growing up, and even if it was, that wasn't happening in this small town. The first movie I remember that happening for me was I saw Die Hard at the Fairlane Mall in Detroit, and they were advertising it as having a different kind of Dolby. I wish I could remember what, because I believe the 70 millimeter print that was traveling around, I did not see the 70 millimeter print. It was like a 6-track Dolby, which was, you know, pretty advanced for that time. But the presentation of what I saw was also, they had rebuilt one of their theaters so they could show movies like Die Hard. This was going to be a new thing. And I got to tell you, seeing Die Hard in that cinema, hearing those guns go off, especially when Officer Carlton, that's what everybody calls him, at the end kills the last villain, saving John McClane. That gun blast just rung out. It shook the heart. It just, you felt it everywhere, in the floor, body, all around you. And that was, for me, as far as audio is concerned, my first and really only experience around that time period of audio just kind of boom, hitting me like a sledgehammer. And it was great. It was great. But most of my experiences was not the IMAX experience. I do remember in Florida, THX became a thing. But THX was only a certification.
Audience is now deaf.
Yeah, exactly. And like, I remember that, and it definitely changed after 89. But for me, that wasn't, that's where you and I'll say it will differ. I was more into the stories, the characters. I'm sure you were too, but I'm saying the audio experience and the floor shaking wasn't as important to me as the communal experience of the story. We would, like, there were times I remember meeting people in the lobby I've never met in my life. We just watched a movie together. We didn't know each other, and we would start talking about what we just saw. And that's something I don't see or experience at all. Like, not even close, and I haven't in 20 years, where people will just congregate, you know, out in the middle of a lobby and just, oh, can you believe that happened? Oh my gosh, that was amazing. And I remember seeing Superman in the theater as a kid, and my dad got so angry because I would not stop talking to the other kids. We were all blown away. We were talking about every scene, 100 miles per hour. There was just this like circle of parents swimming around us like sharks, all wanting to go home. And that experience happened not just when I saw Superman, it happened throughout most of the 80s. Then it began to die out in the 90s, and by 2000 I didn't see it at all. People just wanted to go home.
Yeah. I had a lot of experiences where we'd watch a movie and then we'd go to like Steak and Shake or Denny's afterwards with a group of friends and hang out and talk about the film. Often, like, again, speaking of the midnight showings, you'd end up at Denny's or Steak and Shake. It's the only thing that's open. You'd go there and you'd get yourself some food at 3 a.m. and then go to sleep, back when that was like easy to do. I think that you've got a position where people's, again, community is part of film in general, and I think that we just don't have that same, again, I guess we agree, generally speaking, that our goal has been to have that community experience with people. I think we're kind of in line, just different slightly different variations on the same thing, maybe different flavors of ice cream, for lack of a better comparison, right?
Well, it changed. That's fine. I think that we still, though, talking to people about movies, it was more than just the movie. Though obviously that was the core, but it was that experience, the before, the anticipation of a particular movie, not knowing anything about it, and then talking with your friends and even strangers about movies. It was a great time. And like I said, I think that was still going up until about 2000. I'm not saying it ended completely, for crying out loud, it still happened. But I don't remember going to a theater after, say, Lord of the Rings. That's about the last time I personally remember people so excited and just talking and wanting to talk and saying, oh my gosh, we got to wait a year for the next one. This is horrible. It's different. It just got different. It didn't become bad for those of you who are younger. I'm just saying it changed. And I miss that part.
Yeah, I think we had, to me, I feel like the original Sam Raimi Spider-Man films continued that story trend with people being excited. Maybe there was some other things in there. Definitely the prequel Star Wars, not going to comment on their quality like we talked about earlier, but they were there as well in the same very tightly knit window of time. I think that's an interesting perspective. We almost should probably talk about that, like 99 through like 2004 or 5 window of movies, because I feel like there's a lot of weird, crazy things that happened there. That may be a whole conversation inside of itself. The whole Lord of the Rings and Star Wars and all the stuff that happened in that small window of time. There's a lot of good, driven movies, and it just farted out. I can't even think even Pirates of the Caribbean were there. The 3 movies that came out kind of in quick succession, the 2 and 3 at least. That whole area seems crazy. Looking back at it, I remember being in the theater all the time.
If you look at the budgets, they were
the budgets were insane. That's a whole nother, speaking to like the growth of budgets from films that could bring an audience that cost $20 million to movies that now cost multiple hundreds, even in the early 2000s, basically. So
they got too big. People were only looking for, again, this isn't to counter what you were talking about, but they were only looking for the experience as opposed to what I'll say is a genuinely good movie. And again, good movies still exist. We did an episode that good movies still exist, but you'll notice a lot of people don't go to see the ones that weirdly about a year later everybody's talking about. They'll say, oh, I didn't go see this in the theater. I wonder why. This was great. How come I didn't hear about it? And that's what I hear now more than anything. And I feel like movies just got so big that by the time Marvel became a thing, they were plopping down 150 to 200 million almost right off the bat. Maybe not with Iron Man, but once they hit that, there was no going back, and sort of the carrying capacity, if you will, of audiences and movies just became disproportionate. When I was growing up, James Bond movies, if they hit $40 million, that was expensive, right? That was I seem to recall GoldenEye was when it came out, it was this is the biggest budget of James Bond movies ever, and I think it was 40, 50
They had
million.
to be.
I could be wrong.
No, it's under that for sure, because the most expensive film we had in recent era was Terminator, right? Was 100 million, and we know they were way less than Terminator.
No, 60 million.
So there's a lot of expensive budgets even that early. I mean, look at compared to a Back to the Future or an Aliens. Even Aliens was cheap then by that standard, real cheap. Aliens, the sequel, right? That was $20 million, and that was later, right?
Right.
So I mean, I find it interesting about budgets. It always depends upon the scale and scope of the movie. I think that for sure you have a movie that's like James Bond, the scope and where you're filming is going to make things inevitably more complicated than a mostly studio-based or, soundstage-based movie. That's probably part of it.
Well, it depends. Yeah, no, definitely. Aliens was confined almost entirely to studio, whereas For Your Eyes Only shot in multiple locations, and people don't realize that'll drive a budget up. I used a bad example. Let me just say, if you go to the really early James Bond movies, you'll see the budgets were shockingly low, even for their time period, like Dr. No and From Russia with Love, and they were very low. But if you think about where movies would go, Skyfall was ridiculous, how much it cost, and I can't help but wonder if Cubby Broccoli would have had a coronary if he saw. I think that one, by the time they were done, they said, I think the purported budget was 150 million, but they said the actual budget was $200 million, and again, it broke a ceiling for James Bond, but not for movies of that time period because it became kind of standard.
I'm going to bring up an interesting topic that I think that people will appreciate with going to theaters is that the reality is that it's still a thing that works when it's really good. The catch is that the studios thought for the longest time that adding more money was the key to having success in theaters. And that worked for a while and created billion-dollar grosses, but it didn't make people fall in love with the films. The money spent did not change anything. So, and in fact, some of the cheaper films, often in a saga or series, have been more loved. And frankly, from my experiences, I prefer the older film. It's better. The sequels usually are way worse and way more expensive. And they're hoping that nostalgia barrier, whatever you want to call it, to kick up and be successful. But it just doesn't work the same. A great example of that is for sure ID4. Independence Day. That first film, absolutely massive success, right? Huge. But then the sequel's like just complete garbage, but it has way more money. Like, why? Like, you have to, but then we come back to the same issue is that it's not the same experience. You can't understand it, you can't replace it, and money doesn't make something successful by default. So you're in a position where you're kind of at a loss, let alone not having Will Smith. That's a different conversation though. No, Will Smith is always a problem. If you get rid of your star actor and your sequel, that's a bad idea. And then spend more money. That's crazy. But there's movies like that all the time. They're just hoping they can throw money at it and make more money. It doesn't work that way. So
what's funny is my friend Jeff came over. This was a while back when Terminator had just come out on Blu-ray with us. It was like, I believe, the second time, and they had changed it, remastered it. And he said, "Hey, could I just check this disc before we hang out?" And I said, "Sure, put it in." He put in Terminator, and we ended up watching the whole movie.
There you go.
We got so drawn in, we had to watch it. And maybe that's the best example I could give, is that I feel that's what's missing more than anything. It wasn't even the remastering that drew us in. That's just why we put the disc in to check it out. But what held us was the story, was the characters, and this film was, by all standards, I think it was like 3 to 6 million, I can't remember, but nothing. Peanuts by later standards, and it still enthralls me when I see it. It still excites me when I watch it and you hear that dun 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 dun. I love that film, and I miss movies like that when they were made with, well, just heart. There was a lot of integrity, and I'm not saying all big budget movies are bad. I mean, Lord of the Rings was a great trilogy, and they spent a lot on that. But I'm saying that there's something about those smaller little films that you go watch, and they just draw you in. And if anything, growing up, that's the big miss, is that people are skipping the smaller films today. And again, if you go back and listen to our recommends episode, we recommended multiple movies that people just didn't go see in the theater. They skipped that. They skipped The Fall Guy. Look, I'm not saying it's the greatest movie you'll ever see. It has a big budget, though. And it was a big budget. It was, well, that's what I was saying. It's a big budget movie, but nobody went to see it, is my point. And then Bad Times at the El Royale, nobody went to see it. And so if they're not going to see movies that the money was spent on and that looked great and were good movies, imagine these little movies that people just don't bother with. I feel like horror is the only thing kind of succeeding in that area right now. Horror is the only area where they can make a $2-3 million movie and then pull in $60 to $80 million at the box office, which is a huge coup. Now, I'm not a fan of Terrifier, but it's very well known what 2 and 3 drew in. And then you've got the Blumhouse model, which is still for the most part working. So I don't have any ideas what will change. I don't think it necessarily will, but I do miss growing up the thing that drew me in. It's just weird that it's the opposite. You and I couldn't find information when we were growing up. This generation has nothing but information, and they're inundated with it, and so they don't know what to pay attention to.
Yeah, they're lost.
Do I follow? Yeah.
It's even affected us, right? Because some of the stuff, like, people tell us, like, so for us, we can be told, is this a rewarding movie-going experience now? I mean, it does affect my opinion on some things. For, recently, wanted to go see Lilo and Stitch remake, just throwing out a random thing. My wife's a big fan of Stitch. I like Stitch. I think the original movie is a great movie, but then internet says they threw out most of the storyline and the main villain, some other things, whatever. It's like, I don't need to go see that. Plus, it's a remake, and they made it worse. Why? Why would I waste my time with that? I think it's the problem with most of the information that's out there. Also, the problem is that studios become less disingenuous towards their own product. They're making remakes. They aren't good. They're trying to hide it or trying to pretend like it is. You mentioned Blumhouse. Blumhouse even trying to pretend like, oh, we could just make stuff and and sometimes it's a bad idea and we're trying to be cheap and it didn't work. It's like, well, don't be cheap with big ideas. Like, you can't, that doesn't correlate. I can't believe Universal let them ruin like Wolfman. Like, why? Why would you screw? Why? Like, doesn't make any sense. You let them have carte blanche. Yeah, I know it's technically an open IP. They don't own the rights per se, but still, you got to get it right if your name's attached to it because you're known for this stuff. And I think they got to fix that. I think they were happy that the weird take on the Invisible Man worked, but still, Disconnect is just too big, too open. Like, you got to come back to the core of what made things successful in the first place, what brought the audience in the first place, and that's a love for community and fun and experience and the oohs and ahs of theater and movies, etc. We need that back. If you don't have that, then you're missing. And for us, I think that's the main hallmark of that conversation you had in the lobby. My going to Steak and Shake in the middle of the night at 3 a.m. and having a conversation with some coffee, which is a horrible idea at 3 a.m, and my friends. That's, to us, the highlights of things. And those good memories are critical. And if you don't form those over good films, the films aren't good. I would say it's impossible to make those memories, let alone form them for the future. So
I agree 100%, and I think we'll wrap it up on that because that's the point to make overall is just I'm not referring even it's the experience of sharing with people, and that to me was always about movies. If I go all the way back to the Muppet movie, that was an experience I had that I shared with all these people, and when I was growing up I would meet other people, talk about it. I've met people that we would have never bonded over anything else talking about, but we'd find this one weird movie and we just talk for hours. I'd have to say we changed what this was really going to be about.
We have more to talk about. We have a whole nother episode we can do with what we were going to talk about second part, right? We can do a whole nother one on that now. So yeah.
I wanted to talk about our filmmaking, what got us into filmmaking and our experiences. I feel like we both have some pretty crazy stories about filmmaking, how we started, who we worked with, just different things. And I think that's an episode unto itself now, the more I think about it anyway. So
I want to compliment one thing, Fred. Literally, the movie that we start off the conversation with, the Muppets movie, right, is all about bringing people together, traveling to make people happy. Like, it kind of summarizes the whole conversation we've had. That movie is the embodiment of what cinema and filmmaking is lost. And literally the goals of Kermit and bringing his friends together and making people happy is literally, to me, the fundamental part that we love about movies. That is it, yeah.
So Darren, with that being said, final words.
I don't know. I'm looking forward to the future of films. Hopefully they get better. I could go with some more Muppets now. I think that's been true for a while. They discovered Muppet 3D, RIP. We'll miss you. But thank you, Jim, for all the work you guys that they did on that. I think that's a way I'll end it at the end of the day, because I think that's a positive note, because we really love the Muppets, and I love the Muppets a lot myself. And if you want to learn a lot more about them, go watch them. Go check it out. And then as far as film and experience with friends, take more friends to the theater. Go to the theater with groups of friends. Even if you don't like the movie, go there and have fun. Just don't do the Minecraft jockey thing. Don't do that. So
I know young people on my own server that are very talented. We know guys, every stop motion movie he makes is more fun than the last, and I see a day when he's got a movie out there, and I've known other people that, it's just a matter of getting their shot, getting their chance. And I think that now, if anything, I think the soil is fertile for young people to just grab a camera, go out and make your movie. Just do it. Just do it!
We can go into that because next episode, because that's a highlight, because literally the best piece of advice I've ever been given as a filmmaker is from George Romero, who said, get a camera. If you got one, whatever you got, go film, go make the movie now. Don't wait.
Don't disagree. So with that, I think we're going to say good night. Thanks for coming. Darren, thanks for being here.
Hey, thank you. It's been a blast as always, and we'll see you guys in the next one.